Hi, this is Jeff Spence, your Math 120 instructor for the Community College of Denver, and we're on to our part 2 of section 3A, and now we're going to be talking about absolute and relative change and or difference, change slash difference. So for these problems, we're actually going to be solving for a percent. All the previous problems in part 1, we were given some sort of percent of either a reference value or a compared value, and we had to solve for a certain number using a percent. Now we're actually going to have a formula that's going to get us to the value of that percent given that we don't know it. So we start off with this thing called absolute change and or difference that describes the actual increase or decrease from one value to the next, from a reference value to a new value. So the absolute change is just a simple subtraction. That's the easy part. You know, if your pay goes up from $13 an hour to $18 an hour, your pay went up $5 an hour. Everybody knows that, but we want to know what's the percentage increase, and that's what we're going to solve. So once we get the absolute change, then the relative change or difference is a fraction, and it's remember, a percent is a fraction, and it's just the absolute change, which is the subtraction, divided by the reference value. And then we multiply that by 100 to get the percentage value. Okay, so when we get this fraction here, we're going to get a decimal. To convert a decimal to a percentage, you just multiply by 100 or move the decimal 2 spots to the right. Remember, in part 1 we were doing the opposite. We were moving the decimal 2 spots to the left to convert that percent into a decimal. Now we're solving for the percent, so we have to multiply. So let's say a diverse portfolio grows from 1,500 to 2,250. So what's the absolute change? Well, it went up $750. That's easy, just do the subtraction. But that $750 increase, what's that what is that value as a percentage of what we used to have in the portfolio? Well, you take that absolute change, which is the 750, divide it by the reference value or the original value, okay? And 750 divided by 1500 is 0.5. Take that times 100%, and it's 50%. So how do you know that we're dividing by 1500? Well, 1500 is the starting amount that we started with. So when we do these problems, you always have to remember it's what we're referring to or what we're starting with. Reference value is the starting value or what we're referring to, and in this case the 1500 is what we're starting with, so that's why we divide by that. Okay, next one. Let's say you bought a computer 3 years ago for 1,000. Today it's only worth 300. Describe the absolute and relative change in the computer's value. Well, the absolute change is definitely $700 decrease. Okay, so you see it used to be, the new value is 300. It used to be 100, or it used to be 1,000. So we have a negative 700 value, or negative $700 decrease. Or the negative refers to a decrease, so just keep that in mind. So then we use the relative change formula, and I forgot to mention, this is a formula you should definitely also write down in your notes and eventually have on your formula sheet. This guy right here. And so remember, the relative or the absolute change on the numerator was at 700. Take 700 and divide by 1,000. You get 0.70. Take that times 100% and you'll get 70%. Now remember, it's a negative, and that negative sign tells us the computer is less than what it used to be, not more. 70% less. Alright, so last one here, I believe. Average pay for full-time wage earners varies from state to state. Recent data for 2009 and 2013 show that New York ranked first in average pay at about $60,300 per person, and South Dakota ranked last at $32,800 per person. Compare average pay in South Dakota to that in New York in both absolute and relative terms. So the key thing here is, you know, we're going to be able to do the difference between the two, but we're comparing South Dakota to New York, or comparing to, or you know, what's the percent more than New York, or more or less than New York. And since we're referring to New York, compare something to something, New York is what's going to be considered the reference value, and we'll see that in the formula here. So the absolute difference is what we're comparing to the reference, which is a negative 27,500. So in other words, South Dakota is 27,500 less than New York. Remember, we're comparing to New York, so we're less than New York. And then if we follow our formula here, that negative 27,500 would go in the numerator, and the denominator is your New York, because that's what we're comparing to. That's our reference value. And we'll get a negative 45.6%. So in other words, South Dakota's average pay is 45.6% less, that's what the negative tells us, than New York. Okay, so we know that they make 27,500 less than New York, but as a percentage, it's about 46% if we round to the nearest percent. Okay. Last part about this section is just abuses of percentages. Remember, when we shift reference values, people can fool you and tell you that, say, if you have a pay cut for, let's say your boss comes to you and says, oh, we're having some tough times with the budget, we're going to give you a 10% pay cut, but don't worry, we'll give you a 10% pay raise and you'll be right back to what you used to be. It's not true, because if you, let's say you started with $100 of your, let's say your pay was $100, if you have a 10% pay cut, 10% of $100 is $10. So then your pay would be $90 if you cut that off, right? So you have a $90 pay now. But then if you go to a 10% raise, 10% of 90 is only $9, and then it would get you back to 99, which is less than what you started with. So be careful on that. Less than nothing. You can't decrease or have something taken off by more than 100%. So decreasing caloric intake by 150% to lose weight. Well, if you decrease by 100% on anything, you're down to 0. So you can't have a decrease by more than 100%, because it doesn't make sense to decrease by more than that, because then you're left with nothing. And you can't average percentages. So it said if 70% of the boys and 60% of the girls in a class voted to go to the water park, then 65% of the students in the class voted to go to the water park. That's not necessarily true, because if 70% of the boys, maybe there's a lot more boys than there are girls, so it would be a weighted average. 70% is a percentage of a number of boys, and 60% is a percentage of the number of girls. You can't average out the percent unless you know that the number of boys and girls is exactly the same. So please look out for those tricks, whether they be in the real world or maybe in the homework. I don't think we'll see much in the homework, but it's interesting to look at. And the main part of this lesson, I would just make sure to have your relative difference formula written down and use that. And just the hard part is remembering what the reference value is. Or sometimes I think of the reference value as the original value, the starting amount. But if we ever make a comparison, it's whatever we compare to is what the reference value is. So good luck in your homework, and we'll see you next time.